Welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast, the show that flips the script on cybersecurity. I'm Tim Sadler, the CEO and co-founder of Tessian, and in each episode, I'll be interviewing IT and business leaders about why we need to protect people, not just machines and data, to stop breaches and empower businesses to achieve their missions. Hello and welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast. This week, I'm delighted to be speaking with Debbie Reynolds, a person many of you may know as the Data Diva, a world-renowned technologist, thought leader, and advisor to multinational corporations on global data privacy, data protection, and emerging technology issues. Debbie is well recognized as a technology visionary and a leader in data privacy worldwide. I can't wait to hear her insights. Debbie, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the awesome introduction.
So first up, I'm intrigued to know how you became the Data Diva. Please tell us more.
Oh, great. I ended up, a friend of mine who is a general counsel at Fannie Mae now recommended that I attend this networking group in Chicago. I listened to a lot that she says because she's a very wise woman, Jennifer Mylander. And I went to this group, and it was kind of a workshop really about kind of branding and, LinkedIn and stuff like that. So they put us in groups, and they were telling us to do our elevator pitch. So one of the women who was facilitating was a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. And so I gave her my elevator pitch. She said, "Oh, you're like the Data Diva." And we just laughed about it. It was so funny because I was like, "Oh, wow, that's interesting." Because I feel like reporters, they know how to sum up things. And I said, "I kind of like that." And then so one of the other women in my group said, "Oh my God, you should totally use that," or whatever. So at first I was bashful about it. So I added it to like the end of my LinkedIn headline, and people just started calling me like the next couple of hours. Like, "Oh my God, I love that so much." So so that's what I started using, and it's been fun, especially, I was a kid that never had a nickname. So to me, it's great.
Well, that's awesome. I love it. So you have got a pretty impressive background, and you are a trusted advisor to many organizations around the world. Typically, what does your work cover? What are you talking to these organizations about?
Sure. Well, let's see. People have told me this, and I never thought about it that way. I guess my advisory is somewhat unique because I intersect with people on technology and privacy. So I work with them on I understand the law part of data privacy. I've been involved in data movements for decades, so I know a lot about what you can and can't do in different countries. But then I also am a technologist, so I'm working a lot with companies that are developing tools or emerging things that may not even have laws that relate to it yet. Like, for example, I'm working with a company to develop standards for virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality applications of technology. So I get to advise them on potential regulation in the US and around the world, and then also how they build their tools. So I work a lot with developer groups about things like privacy by design, and then also companies that have multinational dimensions. So, a lot of companies, for example, let's say they're, for example, based in the US, but they have a product they want to sell in Sweden. That's like an example of things that I get involved in. And also I do, data privacy officer work, and I have clients all over the world. So to me, it's great because I get to see so many different, people. So it's not just US based. In fact, I have quite a few clients outside of the country. So it's fun for me because I get to work on, get to sort of guide them through that sort of proactive process with privacy. And, I love to work at a design level because I felt like that's probably where I had the most impact, because I really want to see these companies survive and thrive. And also, I'm a human, right? I want my privacy protected. So I think about that as well in my work.
And from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges organizations are facing regarding data privacy and data protection today?
I think the biggest challenges that companies face related to data privacy and data protection have to do with understanding what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to change. So I know a lot of people in different countries, especially the US, that saw things like the GDPR when it first came out. They were like, well, that's in Europe and that doesn't have anything to do with me. And I'm like, well, actually, it does really.
Mm.
And then privacy can't be something that you just sort of, it can't be like an add-on or something tacked on. Like it really has a fundamental change that has to happen to the way people operate and the way they do business. So I sort of help companies do that process. And then they want like a privacy program. We try to do it, privacy by design, educating everyone, not let it be lip service, right? It has to be actions and actionable things that you can take out, and then making it a process that you bake into the way that a company operates. So I think, you know, for again, when the GDPR came out, a lot of companies didn't realize, how that would impact them because almost any company now is a data company. And if you're doing business, especially if you have any third party relationships, which almost any company has, it gets entangled. So I think the new thing is there are like added responsibilities for third party data holders now because of things like standard contract clauses and other movements, like away from cookies and stuff like that, and like the consent stuff that's happening. So I think we're going through that process again right now. We're re-educating companies about what their obligations are and then how they can bake it into their process.
And you mentioned GDPR, and this is a topic that I wanted to cover today. Have you seen a shift in terms of attitudes in the US with regard to data privacy and data protection in the wake of GDPR being introduced in Europe a few years back? It seems like Europe took a very sort of kind of stringent approach to data protection, again, to preserve privacy for individuals, which I think is something you and I would agree is a good thing. Do you think the US are going to start to tighten their approach to data privacy and data protection as well? I guess we've seen a bit of this with CCPA in California and a few other initiatives.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. That's a great question, actually. Let's see. The GDPR. Well, first of all, when the GDPR first became law, right, in May 2016, I thought that when I would wake up that morning on May 25th and it would be like all over the news, and it wasn't. So I was like, the world has changed today and no one like is paying attention. So here people didn't really start talking about GDPR until the enforcement phase started, right, in 2018. People still in the US talk about GDPR starting in 2018, which is started in 2016. So I think big companies, especially around the 2018 mark, we're getting their stuff together about that. But I think on a consumer level, the first thing that happened that people didn't understand in the US is that all these companies started putting all these cookie banners up. And that was because of GDPR, because a lot of companies couldn't separate or didn't want to separate how they treated EU folks versus US people. And so it's like bananas now. So, because we don't have cookie laws in the US, but we have all these crazy cookie banners and stuff like that. And that's based on GDPR. But I think in the US, the thing that happened that I think is raising more awareness is the CCPA in California. And what the CCPA did, and I guess the GDPR did this in a similar way, but it sort of brought it more to home, I think, in the US, is that people were seeing things on websites saying like, do not share my data. And, are you a California resident? And they were like, hey, I don't have the same rights that people in California have. And why is that? So I think CCPA started to wake people up and had them, asking questions. Why? I think in the U.S. A lot of people presume that we have more privacy than we do because they think, oh, we have freedom of speech and I can do whatever I want, and they sort of think privacy is in there somewhere, and it really isn't. So it's not a fundamental human right in the way that it is in Europe. And so I think those differences are becoming more apparent to people as they're going to websites and they say, well, if you're not in Europe or you're not in California, then you don't have the same rights. So I think that's waking people up.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think people are, there's an increasing awareness and desire for privacy. And also people are increasingly aware of where they're sharing their data as well. And do you think organizations, do you think they're also thinking this through, with enough kind of...
Yeah, I think the place where we are now is really interesting. Consumers and even businesses that can't afford, these huge, data privacy departments and stuff like that. Those companies and those individuals are sort of left to their own devices right now. I say it's like giving a baby a steak at this point. So it's like people don't know what to do. They don't know how to protect their privacy. They don't know what to do. So companies that are showing that they're going to help consumers or businesses protect their business, that's becoming, as I say, a business advantage. I don't think it's a coincidence that Apple had their biggest quarter in fourth quarter 2020 as a result of kind of their privacy push, like trying to cut off this third-party data sharing without consent. And we're seeing other companies try to do that, but I think Apple's done it probably most successfully in terms of people's perception of Apple as a company and how they protect data. So I'm hoping to see more companies jump on that bandwagon. So like you said, it is reputational, but then also, it's not just about being concerned about losing customers. I think it should also be about gaining customers. So customers aren't going to trust companies with their data if they feel like they are not taking privacy seriously. So those who do engender trust in people, they'll be successful.
Yeah, and we've seen this shift. I love your point about Apple, and I'm a fan of that. I think real commitment and focus on privacy. And they've kind of introduced this new concept of their data privacy scorecard, really, for applications that you download and use. And do you think that's going to be part of this behavior change where people actually, before they just sign up for something or download something or share their data with some platform, they are actually going to start to ask those questions of, well, what am I sharing? How are they going to secure it? How am I being tracked? So on and so forth.
Oh, absolutely. I consider I'm almost like a tinfoil hat person, right? So I am very cautious about data and how I share my information. And so just having kind of an Apple device and, I had an example where I had a document it was a public document, right? That I had put on like a Google Drive, and I wanted to share it to an application. And they gave me an alert that said, how you had the button that said, "Oh, share from directly from your Google Drive" or something like that. And I was like, "Okay, well, I'll try that. It seems harmless, right?" This one public document that I wanted to share, it was into an app that did that would read to you. Anyway, this app that I got a message on my phone said, okay, if you share this document in this way, did you know that you're giving that company access to read everything that's on your Google Drive? And I was like, what?
Yeah.
I would not have thought that because it just seems counterintuitive, right? It's like I have a document that I want to share with you for this one purpose. So why would you want to have access to everything on my Google Drive? So as a result, I didn't do that, right? But how would I have known otherwise? Because it doesn't seem right.
Yeah, completely. And we've spoken a lot about data privacy. I wanted to shift gears slightly and talk about a related topic, but slightly different, which is about data protection. So
Mm-hmm.
this is how organizations are securing the data that they hold against loss and theft. Um, and we speak to a lot of security teams and say that this concept of data loss prevention or DLP is a really complex thing to do for enterprises. You have to understand the data that you hold, you have to label it, you have to have some kind of line of prevention. What are your thoughts on this? Like, what is your advice to an organization who's thinking about the most practical way and the must-do things that they should be thinking about with regard to how they secure the data that they hold?
Yeah. I would say one of the big issues, and to me, it's something that any company can do, and it's hard, right? It may not have a huge price tag, but it's difficult for companies to do this at times. So, it's a two-parter. So, one part is collect less data, right? So, the less data that you collect, the less data you have to protect, and then on the back end get rid of data that you are not using or you no longer need. So I think there's a perception with companies that data is valuable and some data is valuable, right? So data that helps inform you in your business and stuff like that. But a lot of companies have data that's aged out of value. So it's maybe something that was possibly, you know, legacy, what is no longer needed in a business, business sense. Something that maybe a lot of people in the organization don't even remember, what's there, and that creates some of company's biggest risks. So that data is not an asset; it's actually a liability. So if we can get people to switch their head to the idea that protecting data, to be more successful in protecting data, you need to know what data you have, right? And then minimize what you're collecting to begin with, and then get rid of things that you don't need because all you're doing is increasing your risk.
And one of the major challenges, I guess, with data protection is the fact that people are the gatekeepers and controllers of this data in most organizations, right? So, like, we use data every day in our jobs. Pretty much whichever function of an organization you're in, you're going to be handling some kind of data. It might be your organization's data, it might be your customers' data, and people are not perfect. They don't always do the right thing with this data. In your opinion, what role do employees play, and how do our organizations set their employees up for success when thinking about how they protect data?
Yeah. Well, employees play a big role. I think the problem that we have when we're communicating this, obviously, you want companies to have things like sessions where we're talking about security awareness and things like that. But to me, you can't just do that once a year and think you're okay with an employee because the tactics change, right? The strategies change from cyber criminals and things that they do, and then so. Employees need to be continually educated, and then they need to have the right tools to do what they need to do. So an example I give is, let's say a company gives someone like a super hard password that they have to remember in some way. That is not going to be helpful to the company, and the person writes that password on a post-it note and put it on their computer, right? So you're like defeating the whole purpose. So I think you have to find ways to help individuals help themselves and help the company. And part of that for me one of the biggest things that I think companies stumble on is giving people too much access. So, it may have been easier to give someone access to everything, and it's harder, right? It's more work to be more granular in how give people permissions to things, because let's say they have a phishing email or something like that. The cyber criminal is looking for, first of all, they're looking for the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest way to get in, but then they also want the highest level access that they can get. So if you have even a lower level employee, if they click on a phishing email, for example, but then you did not restrict their access, that hacker, not a hacker, cyber criminal can do all types of things within the organization. So I think it can't put all the onus on employees. And then I see a lot of companies, when they do these cyber trainings and things like that, they focus almost on the lower level employees, where those people in general don't have the access that the criminal wants. Like, they want a higher level employee, and a lot of times, especially, let's say a person that started at a company and they move up and up and up in the company, a lot of times their access is just being added on to. So they have access to vast amounts of data that they may not need, just because that's just the way that their access sort of accumulated over time. And hackers want those people's credentials. So they look for executives because they know that, maybe they have a secretary is not paying attention, or, they have these higher level access. So I think, for me, I think executives are huge targets, and I think, they can't abdicate, their responsibility. They need to follow the same security rules that everybody else follows within the company.
And of course, there's we've spoken about cyber criminals trying to hack people and get hold of their data, but there's also people doing the wrong thing. So like inadvertent human error. I think under GDPR, like one of the most commonly reported data security incidents is people misdirecting emails containing PII.
Right.
What advice do you have for companies in thinking about, the human factor and how their people are not always going to do the right thing when sharing data?
Yeah. I think you have to try to put up guardrails in some regard. I've seen people have tools where it will send someone an email, will sort of stop the email and say, "Hey, did you realize you're sending a credit card number?" or something like that. So I mean, there are ways around it. Education is definitely the best way. Letting people know what the threats are. As they're emerging, and the best way for them to do like cyber hygiene and not clicking on links. One thing I tell people, not just in business, just, even my family members, especially about phishing, I'm like, typically a phishing attempt is an email or a communication you did not request, right? It's something that pops up as a surprise. And a lot of times it's asking you to do something, take an action, and do it quickly. So when those factors are in place, I would say don't respond, don't click. So regardless of what they say, they typically have those three factors involved.
And how does the shift to hybrid work play into all of this? What changes when we have employees working from home as well as working in the office?
Yeah. Hybrid work changes, I would say, well, it changes a lot. It changes how people are working. It changes the attack surface. Not all, when people were in the office, they were using company computers. They were within the four walls of the organization. They were on those networks. So now they're working from home. They may not be using a company computer, maybe their own computer. They may, I've seen, and this is really interesting. I've seen people who have to work from home that, maybe in the office they were restricted in printing or something. And then when they got home, when they were working from home, they had to find different ways to print stuff. So a lot of them were sending documents to their own personal accounts and having spouses print things, and then you have kids writing on things, maybe confidential information that may be printed in the house. So, I mean, it just creates a lot of issues. So, I don't think, I think hybrid work is here to stay. We just have to figure out what is kind of the best approach. So, we have to find ways to educate people about these cyber threats and how they may be different when you're working from home. So I think people were doing phishing before within the organizations, but I think especially if you're at home, let's say you're at home and you have a personal account, maybe you're doing some cross pollination between your personal and your business account, which I don't recommend. You may have more phishing attempts in your personal accounts than you would in the office, because maybe they have certain software or certain programs that they were using. So it's really about vigilance and understanding, how to kind of keep your work and personal stuff separate. Like if you dial in on a VPN, make sure you're saving your documents in the places that are that are sanctioned by your company, because that's, once you're in their environment, they have better ways to protect their data. And then it's just about vigilance and learning and making sure that we're trying to be as safe as possible when we're at home.
And some security teams really struggle between this concept of maybe some of your advice given earlier, like restricting access to data or minimizing the amount of data in use. But then there's a trade-off of productivity, how people are empowered to do their work. What is your advice on finding that right balance so that you're not so restrictive it's going to stop people from doing their job, but at the same time, you're not being reckless with the data that people are handling and you're not exposing yourself to too much risk?
Yeah, there has to be a medium there. What I'm seeing, so I'll give you an example. What I'm seeing is more on the edges, right? So either I'm seeing people try, restrict access so much that people can't do their work, which doesn't help, or have access so wide open it just makes no sense. It's like everybody's in a bucket. I've seen companies that have had, let's say they have an application that they use, and they have a whole team using the same username and password. That's like a recipe for a disaster. So I think there's a way to get there. I don't think it should be that difficult, as long as the person that's providing the access, they have a strategy for how they give people access to stuff. And that they are sort of evaluating on a periodic basis, maybe every year, going through and make sure that people have the access that they need, because it is important. You want to have people to be productive. You want them to be able to do their work without being encumbered. But what I'm seeing more than anything is people having access to things that they don't need at all. So being able to kind of trim that down, it shouldn't impact anyone's work if you're taking away access for things that they no longer use or don't use right now.
Yeah. And it'd be remiss of me if I didn't talk about the hot topic at the moment. Seems like everyone is talking about ransomware, and there's just this epidemic kind of hitting organizations all throughout the world right now. How has this changed the advice that you're giving to organizations? Typically, what are you providing guidance around with regard to ransomware and this threat?
Yeah. I don't know if ransomware right now is epidemic. I think ransomware is getting more news coverage because we have these sophisticated cyber criminals that are going after these big targets, right? So if there was a mom and pop shop in Idaho that had ransomware, you would never know about that. But because of these bigger targets, we're hearing a lot more about it. And I'm glad that ransomware is in the news, because, it's happening a lot to a lot of businesses that don't make it, right? That don't survive. I think I saw a statistic that said, 60 some percent of small and medium sized businesses that have, a cyber attack or ransomware attack, they go out of business within 6 months. And that should be a concerning statistic, right, for anyone. Actually, just give you a scope, 99% of businesses in the US are considered small business. So not everyone is an Apple or a Target or whatever. And they can't they don't have these multi-million-dollar cyber policies where and then make money, can kind of turn things around at the end. So I think being able to somehow find a way to educate companies and sort of share learnings, I think that's the gap that we have in the US. And it's been a benefit to the cyber criminals because they can let's say they have ransomware for one company or whatever, a lot of times that company wouldn't let anyone know that they were hit by ransomware, and they would try their best to either pay the ransom or find some other way around it, right? But then they wouldn't share what they learned, and as a result of that criminal can go next door to the next business and the next business and keep doing it. So I think somehow there has to be a way where we can sort of gather the lessons that we can learn from other people who've been, hit with ransomware or attacked in a cyber crime type way, so that we can sort of build kind of a prevention campaign. So for a lot of a lot of the companies that get hit is not like a Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise hanging from the ceiling type of thing. They're typically, things like, our server hasn't been adequately updated in a year. Or, we share passwords and don't change them for years, so you're sort of the low-hanging fruit, and a lot of the cyber crime that happens is a low-hanging fruit crime, so like, let's say for instance, your company, you have passwords and everything, everyone passed your servers are patched, you have passwords that you don't share, or things like that. You'll be a less attractive target to a cyber criminal than a company that doesn't do that. So they want a more easy target. So I recommend that companies not be the easy target.
And what advice would you give to those maybe smaller businesses who get hit by ransomware? What should they be thinking about doing in that kind of first 24 hours?
I think in those first 24 hours, they would need to kind of definitely contact their cyber insurer. I hope they have cyber insurance. Cyber insurance companies have resources, right, they can point people to. Also, I think it's very important that companies have backups of their data, so that they can still do work, while this situation is happening. And then try to, after, let's say after they've survived it, whether they paid the ransom, which I don't recommend, but I tell people, especially people who say, oh, people shouldn't pay ransom. It's like, I don't think anyone on the planet ever wants to pay ransom. I don't think you've ever seen a movie where someone say, oh yeah, I totally want to pay ransom or whatever. But what we want to do is avoid companies getting in situations where they have to choose, right? Whether they pay the ransom or whether they go out of business. So I think for companies who've been hit with ransomware, if they can find ways to get out of the situation, I've seen a lot of businesses, what they do, they want to rebuild their complete network again, right? So that's one thing that people tend to do after they have a ransomware attack. They kind of just start over.
Debbie, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating to hear your thoughts, and I'm really grateful for you giving us your time and joining us on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. This is great. I really appreciate it.
At the end of every Are You Human Layer Security podcast, we try and get to know the people behind the podcast a little bit better. So I've got some rapid fire questions for you. The first is, imagine everything in your diary has been cleared. How do you spend the day?
Oh, wow. I'll probably either go shopping or do some maybe gardening or go for a walk in the park.
And what's the best book you've read so far in 2021?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably Privacy is Power. So it's about individuals taking back power with managing their data. It's an amazing book. Carissa
great.
Velez.
Carissa Velez. We'll put
Yeah.
a link in the show notes for our listeners.
Yeah.
And then my final question is, what's your go-to productivity hack?
Oh wow, my go-to productivity hack. I really like, maybe people in Europe don't like this, but I love Google Docs.
I love Google Docs too.
I fell in love with Google Docs. Oh my God. Because it is a cool way to collaborate without creating all like duplicates of stuff all the time. So I can send someone a link. We can collaborate like in real time, and it's a huge productivity thing. So it's not like me to make a change, email you something, and then I change it and I save it. So it eliminates all the copies of stuff, and it keeps track of all the edits and stuff. So I love it.
That's great. Debbie, thank you so much. It's been great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
And that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with more human layer security insights in our next episode. But if you can't wait that long, you can visit our blog at tessian.com/blog, where you'll find lots of amazing content, advice, and tips. And if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.